The box was empty. It was a small thing, really. A velvet box, dark blue, the color of a twilight sky, just before the stars come out. The corners were worn soft. The hinge gave a tired little sigh when you opened it. For 60 years, it had held one thing. My father's watch. Now it held nothing. Just a circular impression in the faded silk lining. A ghost of what should have been there. I didn't panic. My hands didn't tremble. That's not my way. My father, a man who built cabinets with hands that could crush walnuts or cradle a baby bird with equal care, taught me stillness. He taught me to measure twice, cut once. In carpentry and in life. So I just stood there in the quiet of my bedroom, and I looked at the empty space. The watch wasn't particularly valuable, not in the way the world values things today. It was a simple gold-plated Elgin. He bought it with his first paycheck after coming home from the war in Europe. He said it was the first beautiful thing he'd owned that wasn't issued by the government. He wore it every single day. When he was dying in that sterile white room that smelled of bleach and fear, he took it off and gave it to me. His hand was all bone and paper-thin skin, but his grip was firm. "Time's the only thing you can't make more of, son," he'd whispered. "Don't waste it," and I hadn't. I'd worn it to my wedding, to the hospital when my daughter, Sarah, was born. I wore it the day I buried my wife, Eleanor. The steady tick-tock against my wrist was a connection, a reminder, a quiet conversation with a man long gone. I had stopped wearing it daily about 10 years ago when the band became too fragile. I kept it in the velvet box in my sock drawer, nestled between pairs of thick wool socks. I'd take it out on his birthday or our anniversary. I'd wind it, listen to its heartbeat for a while, and then put it back. A ritual, a quiet nod to the past. My grandson Leo's high school graduation was tomorrow. I had planned to give it to him. A passing of the torch, a piece of his history, of our family's history, resting on his young wrist. But the box was empty. I knew, instantly. There was no mystery to solve, no frantic search to be made. There was only a cold, hard certainty that settled in my gut like a block of ice. Sarah had been here last week. She'd come by on a Tuesday, a whirlwind of manufactured crisis and breathless chatter. Her visits were always like that. She didn't so much enter a room as occupy it, sucking up all the quiet and replacing it with her own noise. She complained about her husband, Mark. Complained about her job. Complained about the price of everything. "I just need a break, Dad," she'd said, pacing my small living room. "Mark and I are fighting constantly. We need to get away. Reconnect." We were looking at this little resort in Mexico. All-inclusive. Just to get our heads straight, I'd listened. That's what I always did. I listened to the words, and I listened to the space between them. The space was always where the real request was hiding. I'd given her money for a new water heater last month. For new tires before that. I was no longer a father. I was a line of credit. A utility. I had made coffee, the strong black kind I like, and she made a face. "God, Dad, how can you drink that stuff? It's like tar." She poured half of it out and filled the mug with milk and sugar. Sacrilege. She had followed me around the house, talking. At one point, she'd gone into my bedroom. I heard her opening drawers. I assumed she was looking for an old photo album or something she'd left behind as a teenager. "Just getting nostalgic, Dad," she called out. Nostalgic. A $5 word for a $1,000 crime. I closed the empty box and put it back in the drawer. I walked into the living room and sat down in my armchair, the leather worn smooth and cool against my back. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked, a slow, merciless rhythm. Each tick was a second of my father's life. Each tock, a second of mine. I picked up the phone. I dialed her number from memory. She answered on the third ring, her voice bright and distant. I could hear the sound of waves in the background. "Dad, hi. Is everything okay?" I didn't bother with pleasantries. "Sarah." The watch has gone silence. Not a long silence, but a dense one. In that brief pause, I heard everything. Guilt. Annoyance at being caught. A quick calculation of how to lie her way out of it. The watch? What watch? Her voice was a little too high, a little too innocent. "My father's watch," I said. My own voice was flat, devoid of emotion. It felt like it was coming from someone else. The one I was going to give to Leo for his graduation. Another pause. Then a sigh. A put upon, exasperated sigh. The kind she used when I asked her to explain how to use the new television remote. Oh, that. Dad, don't be so dramatic. The word hung in the air between us, between my quiet house in Ohio and her sunny beach in Mexico. I needed the money, Dad, she said, her voice shifting from false innocence to defensive justification. It was just sitting in your drawer collecting dust. It's not like you ever wear it. I pawned it. It was for the trip, for my marriage. You of all people should understand wanting to save a marriage. The mention of my own marriage, of my 50 years with Eleanor, was a low blow, a deliberate twisting of the knife. I'll get it back, she added in afterthought. When we get back on our feet, I have the ticket right here. It's perfectly safe. It wasn't about the money. She knew that. It was never about the money. It was about the trust. It was about the history she had sold for a week of sunshine and cheap cocktails. She had taken a piece of my soul and put a price tag on it. You pawned your grandfather, I said, the words coming out slow and heavy. You sold a piece of him. Oh, for God's sake, stop it, she snapped. The waves in the background seemed to get louder. It's just a thing, an old piece of metal. You have your memories. Isn't that enough? I have to go. Mark is waving at me. We'll talk when I get back. I love you. She hung up. I held the receiver in my hand for a long time, listening to the dial tone. A dead, empty sound. I placed it carefully back in its cradle. I didn't slam it. I didn't shout. I just sat there in my armchair, the one with the permanent imprint of my body, and I felt something inside me shift. It wasn't a sudden break. It was more like a slow, geological event. A tectonic plate, grinding and groaning for decades, had finally settled into a new position. A permanent one. The hurt was there. It was a vast, cold ocean inside my chest. But underneath it, something else was rising. Something hard and clear and sharp. Clarity. I had spent the last 20 years of my life as an afterthought. A convenience. A walking, talking safety net. I was a reliable old dad who would always be there, with a checkbook and a patient ear. The man who would watch the grandkids, fix the leaky faucet, offer a down payment for their oversized house. They took, and I gave and gave because that's what a father does. But my own father's ghost was in the room with me. I could almost hear his voice, rough as sandpaper. Measure twice, cut once. I had been measuring for a long, long time. I had been measuring the dismissive tone in my son-in-law's voice when he called my stories ancient history. I had been measuring the way Sarah's eyes glazed over when I talked about her mother. I had been measuring the Christmases where my gift to them was a substantial check, and their gift to me was a novelty coffee mug that said "World's Best Grandpa." They hadn't just pawned a watch. They had pawned me. They had taken my love, my history, my devotion, and sold it for scraps, believing, in their careless entitlement, that they could just buy it all back later, whenever it was convenient for them. The grandfather clock began to chime. 6 o'clock. The sound echoed in the silent house. I stood up. My knees creaked, but my back was straight. I walked into my small office, a room filled with books and the faint smell of old paper. I sat down at the heavy oak desk that had also been my father's. I pulled out a piece of plain white paper and a pen. The pen felt solid and real in my hand. I began to make a list. The next day, I woke up before the sun. I didn't sleep much. The anger I expected never came. Instead, I felt a strange and profound calm. The decision had been made in the quiet hours of the night, and now there was only the work of carrying it out. I made coffee, the real stuff. I ground the beans myself, the whirring sound of familiar comfort. I brewed it strong and black and poured into my favorite mug, a heavy ceramic one with no words on it. I sat at my kitchen table and watched the sky lighten from charcoal to gray to a pale, hopeful blue. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. A picture of a beach at sunrise. The caption read, "Thinking of you. Wish you were here." I looked at the picture. The beautiful, empty beach. The vacation I had paid for with a piece of my father's life. I deleted it. I didn't reply. I just deleted it. The action was small, but it felt significant. A snip of a thread. After my coffee, I went to the graduation. I drove my old Ford pickup, the one Mark always made fun of. "You should get a real car, Frank. Something from this century," but the truck was reliable. It started every time. It never let me down. I saw Leo standing with his friends, his cap and gown making him look older, more serious. He saw me, and his face broke into a wide, genuine smile. He came over and gave me a hug. "Grandpa, you came. Wouldn't miss it, son," I said, clapping him on the back. "Is Mom with you?" he asked, looking around. "No," I said simply. "She's away." He looked disappointed for a moment, then shrugged it off. He was a good kid, resilient. He had his grandmother's eyes. Kind eyes. After the ceremony, I took him for lunch at the diner. The one with the red vinyl booths and the waitress who calls everyone Han. We ate burgers and fries. I didn't mention the watch. I didn't want to poison his day. This day was about him, about his future. Instead, I gave him a check. It was more money than I had ever given anyone at one time. "For college," I said, sliding the envelope across the sticky tabletop. "For books, for tuition, for whatever you need. But it's for you, not for anyone else. You understand?" He opened it and his eyes went wide. "Grandpa, this is too much." "No, it's not," I said. "It's an investment in a good man." He looked at me, really looked at me, and in his eyes I saw understanding. He knew, somehow, that this was more than just money. It was a statement. When I got home, the house felt different. It was no longer a family home waiting for the family to arrive. It was just a house. My house. The silence was no longer lonely. It was peaceful. I went to my desk and looked at the list I had made. The first item was lawyer. I found the number in my old address book. Mr. Thompson. He had handled our wills after Eleanor passed. A dry, meticulous man. Exactly what I needed. I called his office and made an appointment for the following Monday. Then I went to work on the second item on my list. I spent the rest of the weekend in my workshop. The smell of sawdust and linseed oil was my incense. The hum of the table saw was my hymn. For years, I had been making things for other people. A bookshelf for Sarah's new house. A toy chest for Leo when he was a boy. A set of Adirondack chairs for Mark, which he promptly painted a god-awful shade of turquoise without asking. This time, I was building something for myself. I had a beautiful piece of cherrywood I'd been saving. It had a rich, warm grain. I decided to build a new box. A proper one. A valet box to hold my own things. My wedding ring, which I kept safe now that my knuckles were too swollen to wear it. My father's dog tags from the war. A few other small keepsakes. I worked slowly, deliberately. I measured each piece with my father's old brass ruler. I cut the dovetail joints by hand, the chisel sharp, the mallet blows precise. The work focused my mind. Each curl of shaved wood that fell to the floor was like a worry being stripped away. I wasn't thinking about Sarah. I wasn't thinking about the watch. I was thinking about the wood, about the grain, about making the joints fit so perfectly they looked like they had grown that way. I put on some music, not the old country songs Eleanor loved, but the rock and roll I grew up with. Creedence Clearwater Revival. The sound filled the garage, loud and defiant. For the first time in a long time, I didn't worry if the neighbors could hear. By Sunday evening, the box was finished. I sanded it smooth as glass, then rubbed it with oil until the wood glowed from within. It was beautiful. It was solid. It was mine. I took the old, empty velvet box from my sock drawer. I walked it out to the trash can, and I dropped it inside. It made no sound. On Monday morning, I put on my good suit. It felt a little tight in the shoulders. I drove downtown to Mr. Thompson's office. The building was all glass and steel, a world away from my workshop. The air inside smelled of paper and weak coffee. Mr. Thompson hadn't changed. He was still thin as a rail, with a neat gray haircut and glasses that made his eyes look bigger. He shook my hand with a grip that was surprisingly firm. "Frank," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Good to see you. I trust you're well." "I'm fine, Henry," I said, sitting down. "I need to make some changes." I laid it out for him. Simply, factually. I didn't talk about pawn shops or vacations to Mexico. I didn't talk about my feelings. I just gave him instructions. I want to change the executor of my will. I want to remove my daughter, Sarah, and name my grandson, Leo. Instead, he made a note on a yellow legal pad. He didn't ask why. He was a professional. "Next," I continued, "I want to revoke the power of attorney I previously granted to my daughter." Another note. His pen scratched quietly on the paper. "And finally, I want to set up a living trust. I want all my assets, the house, my savings, my pension, my investments, to be placed in this trust. Upon my death, the sole beneficiary will be Leo. I want a clause included that a portion is to be used exclusively for his education, and the rest is his to manage as he sees fit for the first time. Mr. Thompson looked up from his pad. He peered at me over his glasses. Frank, this is a significant change. Are you sure this is what you want? I've never been more sure of anything in my life, I said. My voice was steady. He held my gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Very well. It will take a few days to draw up the paperwork. We'll also need to file the revocation of the power of attorney with your financial institutions. They will likely notify the previous agent on file. I'm aware, I said. I knew that a letter would be sent to Sarah. A cold, official letter informing her that her authority over my life had been terminated. That was part of the process. A necessary step. There's one more thing, I said, reaching into my jacket pocket. I pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. The pawn ticket. I had called Sarah back. A short, one-sided conversation. I had demanded the ticket number and the name of the shop. She had given it to me, her voice sullen and resentful. I slid it across the desk to him. This is for a piece of personal property. My father's watch. I want you to arrange to have it retrieved. Use my funds. Send the bill to me. I didn't want to go to that place myself. I didn't want to see the place where my family's history had been traded for cash. I wanted it handled cleanly, impersonally. Mr. Thompson picked up the ticket. He looked at it, then back at me. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Not pity, understanding. I'll take care of it personally, Frank, he said. I left his office and walked out into the bright sunshine. I felt lighter than I had in years. The suit still felt tight, but I felt like I could breathe again. The world looked sharper, the colors more vibrant. My next stop was the bank. I had been banking at the same branch for 50 years. I knew the names of the tellers. The branch manager, Maria, was a young woman, sharp and efficient. I had helped her father build a deck one summer, long ago. I sat down at her desk. I explained that I needed to restructure my accounts. I wanted to close the joint savings account I held with my daughter. I wanted to open a new checking and savings account in my name only. I wanted to change the beneficiary on my retirement accounts from Sarah to the new trust once it was established. She listened patiently, typing into her computer. Like the lawyer, she was a professional. But unlike him, she was a neighbor. Is everything all right, Mr. Miller? She asked softly, her fingers pausing on the keyboard. I looked at her. A good woman. A mother herself. Everything, I said, is finally being made right. She nodded and didn't press. She just did her job, efficiently and with a quiet kindness. As she printed out the new documents for me to sign, I watched Sarah's name disappear from my financial life. It was like closing a door, quietly but firmly. A door that had let in a cold draft for far too long. When I got home, the red light on my answering machine was blinking. One message. I pressed the button. It was Sarah. Her voice was strained. Dad, I'm back. The trip was fine. Call me. We need to talk. I stood there for a moment, listening to the hiss of the empty tape after her voice cut off. We need to talk. What she meant was, I need to talk, and you need to listen. What she meant was, I need to explain myself in a way that makes me the victim and you the unreasonable one. And you need to accept it and forgive me so we can go back to how things were. But we couldn't go back. The road back was gone. I erased the message. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I went into the living room and looked through the family photos on the mantelpiece. There was one of Sarah as a little girl, gap-toothed and smiling on her first bicycle, which I had run alongside for hours until she found her balance. There was one of her on her wedding day, looking beautiful and happy, her arm linked through mine. And there was the most recent one, the family portrait from last Christmas. Me, Sarah, Mark, and Leo. We were all smiling for the camera. But looking at it now, I could see the truth. Sarah was looking at Mark. Mark was looking at the camera. Leo was looking at his phone, just out of frame. And I was looking at Sarah with a hopeful, waiting expression on my face. Waiting for what? For her to see me? To really see me? I picked up the photo. The frame was silver-plated, a gift from them one year. I opened the back, slid the picture out, and put it away in a desk drawer. Then I took the empty frame and put it in a box of things destined for the thrift store. I didn't need a picture to remind me of what I had lost, or of what I was finally, quietly reclaiming. The letters from the bank and the lawyer's office must have arrived on the same day. The storm broke on a Thursday. My phone started ringing around noon. I was in the workshop planing the edge of a new piece of oak, and I let it ring. The sound was shrill, intrusive. It rang, stopped, and immediately started again. And again. After the fifth time, it went to voicemail. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text message. Then another, and another. I finished my pass with the plane, checked the edge for squareness, and then wiped my hands on a rag. I walked into the kitchen and picked up the phone. 3 missed calls from Sarah. 1 from Mark. 7 new text messages. 3 new voicemails. I listened to the voicemails first. The first was from Sarah. Her voice was tight with confusion and rising anger. "Dad, what is this letter from a bank? They're saying you closed our joint account? And something about power of attorney? This has to be a mistake. Call me immediately." The second was also from Sarah, recorded just minutes later. The confusion was gone, replaced by pure fury. I just got off the phone with some paralegal from Henry Thompson's office. A living trust? Leo as executor? What the hell are you doing? Are you senile? Did Leo put you up to this? You have to call me right now, Dad. This is insane. The third was from Mark. His voice was laced with a kind of condescending faux concern that was far more insulting than Sarah's open anger. "Frank, it's Mark. Listen, Sarah's pretty upset. We're worried about you. Making these kinds of big financial decisions on your own, well, it's not wise. We think you might be confused. Just give us a call so we can sort this all out. We're on your side here, on my side." They were on my side, as long as my side was their side. I deleted all 3 messages. Then I read the texts. They were a rapid-fire progression of her emotional decay. "Dad, call me. The bank sent something weird. Seriously, answer your phone. This isn't funny. I just spoke to your lawyer. What did you do? You were cutting me out? Your only daughter? After everything I've done for you. Mom would be rolling in her grave if she saw this. She would be so ashamed of you. This is about the watch, isn't it? This is the most childish, pathetic thing you have ever done. You're trying to punish me. Fine, but you're hurting Leo, too. Mark and I are coming over." That last one made me pause. I looked at the clock. It was almost 1. They live an hour away. I walked to the front door and slid the deadbolt across. I did the same with the back door. It wasn't that I was afraid of them. I just didn't want them in my house. Not today. Not anymore. My house was my sanctuary now, and they were not welcome. I went back to my workshop and turned the radio up. The Rolling Stones. "Gimme Shelter." It seemed appropriate. I picked up my plane and went back to work. The rhythmic scrape of steel on wood was the only sound I wanted to hear. An hour later, I heard a car pull into the driveway, the tires crunching on the gravel. A car door slammed, then another, then the frantic, insistent ringing of my doorbell. I kept planing. "Shick, shick, shick." The doorbell stopped. Then came the pounding on the door. "Dad, open this door. We know you're in there. We can hear the music." Sarah's voice, sharp and shrill. I ignored it. I focused on the wood. The goal was to get a perfectly smooth, flat surface. It required concentration, patience. Then Mark's voice, booming and falsely authoritative. "Frank, don't be ridiculous. Open the door and let's talk about this like adults." Like adults. An adult doesn't steal from her father. An adult doesn't sell her family's history for a plane ticket. The pounding continued for another 10 minutes. They shouted. They pleaded. They threatened. They tried to guilt me, invoking my dead wife's name like a weapon. Through it all, I just kept working. The pile of fragrant, curly shavings at my feet grew larger. Finally, they gave up. I heard them stomping back to their car, their angry, frustrated voices muffled by the walls of my garage. A car door slammed with finality. The engine roared to life, and they sped away. The silence they left behind was beautiful. It was clean. Later that afternoon, another car pulled into the driveway. This one drove slowly, respectfully. I heard a single car door close gently. A few moments later, there was a soft knock on my back door, the one that led to the workshop. I put down my tools and went to the door. I looked through the small window. It was Leo. He was standing on the steps, looking uncertain, his hands shoved in his pockets. I unbolted the door and opened it. "Grandpa," he said, his voice quiet. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside and let him pass. He walked into the workshop and looked around at the tools, the benches, the stacks of lumber. "Mom and Dad came by my apartment," he said, not looking at me. He was staring at the half-finished valet box on my workbench. "They're really mad. They said you wrote them out of the will, that you gave everything to me." I waited. I didn't say anything. He finally turned to look at me. His young face was troubled. "They think I asked you to do it. That I manipulated you, did you?" I asked, my voice even. "No," he said, his head snapping up. "Of course not. I didn't even know until they showed up yelling." He took a breath. "Grandpa, I don't want your money. Not like this. I don't want it to be because you're angry with them." I walked over to the workbench and ran my hand over the smooth cherry wood of the box. "This isn't about anger, Leo. Anger is a hot fire. It burns out. This is different. This is a correction. It's about respect." I looked him in the eye. "Your mother pawned my father's watch. Your great-grandfather's watch. The one I was going to give you." I saw the understanding dawn in his eyes, followed by a wave of shame. Shame for his mother's actions. He looked down at the floor. "I know," he whispered. "She told me. She said it was no big deal. That it was just an old watch. It was never about the watch," I said. "It was about what it represented. And she didn't see it. She couldn't see it. All she could see was what she wanted." I paused. "You, on the other hand, you see it. That's why you're here. You came to talk to me, not to yell, not to demand." I picked up a small block of wood and a piece of sandpaper. "This isn't a reward for you, Leo, and it's not a punishment for her. It's an acknowledgement of character. I'm investing in good character. Your character." He was quiet for a long time. He watched me as I began to sand the small block of wood, my motions slow and even. "What was he like?" Leo asked suddenly. "Great-grandpa," I smiled. It was the first real smile I'd felt in a week. He was a quiet man. He smelled of sawdust and Old Spice. He taught me that you can't force a piece of wood to be something it's not. You have to work with the grain, or it will split. We stayed in the workshop for hours. I showed him how to use the hand plane, how to hold it just right, how to read the wood. He was a natural. He had good hands. He had his great-grandfather's hands. He didn't mention the money or the will again. We just worked side by side. And in that quiet, shared space, a new foundation was being laid. One built not on obligation or entitlement, but on mutual respect, on working with the grain. A week later, a small, insured package arrived from Mr. Thompson's office. I opened it carefully. Inside, nestled in a bed of white cotton, was my father's watch. It had been cleaned and polished. The crystal gleamed. I picked it up. The weight of it was familiar in my palm. I wound the small knob on the side. I held it to my ear. Tick-tock, tick-tock. The sound of a steady heart. The sound of a life well lived. I opened the new cherrywood box I had made. The inside was lined with soft, dark green felt. I placed the watch carefully inside. It looked right. It looked home. The phone calls from Sarah and Mark eventually stopped. They were replaced by a series of long, rambling emails. They were a masterclass in psychological manipulation. There were accusations. There was blame. There were attempts to rewrite history, to paint me as a cold, unfeeling father who had always favored my late wife over my own daughter. There were sob stories about their financial struggles, followed by veiled threats about my old age and who would be there to take care of me. I read each one. I needed to see the full scope of their delusion, their inability to see their own role in this. With each paragraph, my resolve hardened. They weren't sorry for what they had done. They were sorry they had gotten caught. They were sorry their ATM had been shut down. I never replied. I created a special folder in my email account and moved them all there, unread after the first few. A digital record of why I had to do what I did. My life settled into a new rhythm. It was a quiet rhythm, but it was my own. I sold the big house. It sold quickly. Standing in the empty rooms after the movers had taken my few chosen pieces of furniture was a strange experience. There were no ghosts, just echoes. I felt a pang of sadness for the family I thought I had, for the memories I tried to build within those walls. But the sadness was thin, like morning mist. The feeling underneath, it was relief. I moved into a small, two-bedroom apartment in a quiet complex on the other side of town. It was clean and bright, with a small balcony that overlooked a park. I set up one bedroom as my own, and the other became my new, smaller workshop. It was all I needed. Leo helped me move. He never once complained. He hauled boxes, assembled furniture, and helped me set up my tools. We ordered pizza and ate it sitting on the floor of my new living room, surrounded by boxes. "You sure about this, Grandpa?" he asked, gesturing around the small space. "It's a big change. It's the right change," I said. "Your great-grandmother always said, don't keep anything in your house that you don't know to be useful or believe to be beautiful." I'm just finally taking her advice. My days became simple and meaningful. I wake up early, make my coffee, and sit on the balcony, watching the world come to life. I'd read the newspaper. I'd go for a walk in the park. I'd spend a few hours in my workshop, making small, intricate things. A carved bird for the woman next door who fed the sparrows. A set of wooden coasters for the diner. Things I wanted to make, not things I was obligated to build. I reconnected with old friends. I started going to the weekly poker game at the VFW post again, something I hadn't done in years because Sarah always seemed to have some emergency that required my attention on a Friday night. I sat with men my own age, men who had seen the world and understood the value of a quiet life. We played cards, told old stories, and drank cheap beer. No one asked me for anything. My presence was enough. One Saturday, Leo showed up with a surprise. It was a turntable and a box of old records he'd found at a thrift store. Johnny Cash, Patsy Cline, Hank Williams. "Thought you might like these," he said, a shy smile on his face. That afternoon, we sat and listened to music. The crackle of a needle on the vinyl was a warm, comforting sound. It was the soundtrack of my youth. I told him stories about the songs, about the dances I'd gone to with his grandmother, about the world as it was then. He listened. He actually listened. He asked questions. He was interested not in what I could give him, but in who I was, who I had been. Months passed. The seasons changed. I received the final papers for the trust from Mr. Thompson. Everything was in order. My life was my own, legally and financially secure. I felt a profound sense of peace. The constant, low-level anxiety that had been my companion for years, the worry about Sarah's next crisis, the feeling of being on call, was gone. I was no longer waiting by the phone. I was living. Then, one afternoon, the inevitable happened. There was a knock on my apartment door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole. It was Sarah. She was alone. She looked different, thinner. Her face was pale, and there were dark circles under her eyes. The defiant anger was gone, replaced by a weary sadness. I hesitated. My first instinct was to ignore it, to pretend I wasn't home. But my father's voice echoed in my mind. "Face things head on, son. Don't hide." I took a deep breath and opened the door. I didn't open the chain. I just opened the door enough to see her and for her to see me. I stood there, blocking the entrance. "Dad," she said. Her voice was hoarse. "Sarah." I kept my own voice neutral. She looked past me, into the small, unfamiliar apartment. "So this is it. This is where you live now. This is my home," I said. She flinched, as if the word home was a slap. We stood in silence for a long moment. The sounds of the apartment building, a distant television, a baby crying, filled the space between us. Mark and I separated," she said, looking down at her hands. "He left last month." I didn't say, "I'm sorry, it wouldn't have been true." I just waited. "The money's gone," she continued, her voice barely a whisper. "All of it. The vacation was a bust. We fought the whole time. It didn't fix anything. It made everything worse." She finally looked up at me, and her eyes were filled with tears. "I lost everything, Dad. My husband, my house. We're having to sell the house." She was waiting for me to fix it. That was the old pattern. She would create a disaster, and I would clean it up. I could feel the pull of it, the ingrained habit of a lifetime of fatherhood. But I was not that man anymore. "You came here for money," I stated. It wasn't a question. She shook her head, tears now streaming down her face. "No, I mean yes. At first. That's what I thought I needed. But that's not it. Not really." She took a shaky breath. "I came here to say I'm sorry. About the watch. About Everything. It was the first time she had said those words without a but attached. I was in a pawn shop last week, she said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, selling my wedding ring. And I saw them, the shelves, full of people's things, people's memories. And I finally understood. I saw what I did. I sold a piece of you, a piece of our family. For nothing, I listened. I heard the words. I believed she was sincere in that moment. But sincerity born of desperation is a fragile thing. I miss you, Dad, she whispered. I miss talking to you. That was the line that almost broke me. Because I had missed her, too. I had missed the daughter she used to be, the little girl with the gap-toothed smile. But that girl was gone, and I had to accept that. I know you do, I said, and my voice was softer now. But what you did, Sarah, wasn't just one mistake. It was the last one. It was the one that made me see that the foundation was rotten. I can't build on that anymore, but we can fix it, she pleaded. I can change. I will change. Change is hard work, Sarah, I said. It's not a promise. It's something you do every day when no one is watching. It's not about getting something back that you lost. It's about becoming someone who deserves to have it in the first place. I looked at her, my daughter, a woman I loved but could no longer trust. A stranger standing on my doorstep. I'm not angry at you anymore, I said, and it was the honest truth. The anger had long since burned away, leaving behind something cleaner, sadder. I hope you find your way. I truly do. But my life is my own now. I have peace here, and I will not give that up. I closed the door. I didn't slam it. I closed it gently until the latch clicked into place. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood. I could hear her weeping on the other side. It was the hardest thing I have ever had to do. Harder than burying my wife. Harder than burying my parents. Because this was a different kind of death. This was the death of a hope I had carried for far too long. The hope that one day my daughter would finally see me. A few weeks later, a letter arrived. It was handwritten. I recognized Sarah's script, though it was shakier than I remembered. I let it sit on my kitchen counter for 3 days. I was afraid to open it. Afraid of what it might contain. More pleas, more blame, more attempts to pull me back into the storm of her life. Finally, on the 4th day, I made my coffee, sat down at my table, and opened it. It was short, just a few paragraphs. It wasn't a request for money or forgiveness. It was an apology, a real one. She wrote about her childhood, about the things she now realized she had taken for granted. She wrote about her own failings with a clarity that surprised me. She wrote that she understood my decision. She didn't agree with it, but she understood it. She ended the letter with one sentence. I hope that one day I could be the kind of person you would be proud to know. I folded the letter and put it in the top drawer of my desk. I didn't reply. Not yet. The door to that relationship was not locked and bolted anymore, but it was still closed. It would be up to her, through her actions over a long period of time, to prove that she was worthy of being invited back in. And maybe she would be, and maybe she wouldn't, but my peace was no longer dependent on it. Last night, Leo came over for dinner. I made pot roast, the way his grandmother used to make it. He told me about his classes, about a girl he liked. We talked. We laughed. It was easy. It was real. After dinner, I went to my room and came back with the cherrywood box. I set on the table in front of him. I wanted to give this to you at your graduation, I said. Things got complicated, but the sentiment remains. He opened it. He looked at the watch, gleaming on its bed of green felt. He looked at me, his eyes shining. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. He carefully took it out of the box. He fastened the old, fragile band around his wrist. It fit perfectly. Thank you, Grandpa, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I'll take care of it. I promise. I know you will, I said. I looked at my father's watch on my grandson's wrist. A circle, unbroken. A line of history, not of blood, but of character. A legacy of quiet strength, passed down to a generation worthy of carrying it. I am an old man. I have lived a long life. I have made mistakes. I have loved and I have lost. But as I sit here now, in my small, quiet apartment, with the sound of my grandson washing dishes in the kitchen and the ticking of a familiar clock in my memory, I am not lonely. I am not bitter. I am whole. I am at peace. My life is my own, and it is enough.